Carbon Knights Gaming.
Hello Knights, and welcome to our first ever Reddit post reading. I know these videos are popular, they're also gaming related in this case, so I thought I would give it a shot, and seeing as how everyone in Carbon Knights has played D&D and enjoys it, I thought I'd start with something from r/dndstories. This post is by user Sumpfi157. And it's called Fun with Books, or How Illiteracy Saved the Whole Group from Certain Death. As a DM, one of my favorite things to do is to drop random things, beings, situations onto my players. In other stories, I often complain about how my group really puts the chaotic into chaotic good, but at the end of the day, I think I personally instigate 90% of the shenanigans that my group come up with. And I can say with 100% certainty that the following story was on me. The usual suspects: the barbarian, tall, strong, and a complete sex menace. And surprisingly, able to read and write. The druid, tall, strong, and not the barbarian. Also the very unlikely MVP of this story. The dwarf. We had a rumor in the group that he was actually the proto-dwarf, that all other dwarfs came from due to him being the most dwarf-like dwarf you could ever imagine. The lizard mage. Magical powerhouse and kinda unstable mentally. Surprisingly, not the cause of most of the shenanigans of our group. The special elf. Definitely the cause of 90% of the shenanigans that our group got into. Anger issues, low impulse control, a fear of magic, and uncontrollable bloodlust. The merchant. Absolutely not the voice of reason in this story. The setup was as follows. Because the group had accrued a large debt, they decided that grave robbery would be a fine way to make the money back. Or more precisely, robbing an artifact manufactory that had been destroyed in the Big War. At the start of our story, they had already made it out of there with an uncharacteristically low amount of property damage caused, and among their fat stash of loot was a bunch of books. Now in our world, books were a really big deal, specifically magical books, and the group was hoping to make a fat profit off of these books. IRL, I had made about 20 flip cards, with different book titles and some special surprises that only revealed themselves once a player unfolded the flip card when their character read said book. They were magical books, after all. As the group had put some safe distance between themselves and the artifact forge, they sat down for a pause and set up camp. This was due to the fact that they were in the middle of a desert and couldn't really make any distance in the scorching midday sun. Once the camp was set up and the animals were taken care of, the merchant has a brilliant idea. Let's go through the books so we can appraise them. That way we can fetch a better price back in the city. And proceeds to unfold the first of several flip cards. The book he looks at turns out to be a copy of a rather mundane magic book. Except it was signed by the author himself. Boom! Instant 5 times value. It was at this point that all of my players were struck down with a terrible status effect. Loot hunger. Minus 10 wisdom, minus 10 intelligence, over 9,000 greed. Suddenly, everyone wanted to read a book, even the barbarian whose military schooling meant he was, to everyone's surprise, proficient at both reading and writing. Even the mage-phobic elf wanted in on the action. The first step to destroying our enemy is to know your enemy. The only player who didn't want to participate was the druid, who was, again to everyone's surprise, illiterate. What followed was a perfect storm of complete chaos. The books and effects drawn were the mage, mind-altering hallucinations due to a potent hallucinogen that had been infused in the pages of the book. Dwarf, minor possession by an evil spirit for 3 hours. Elf, compulsion to keep reading the book over and over again. Barbarian, magical terror. Merchant, double tome, 2 books in 1. 4 of 5 of my players had managed to pull the worst types of effects out of a pile of 20 effects at the same time. And then, they tripped the effects at the same time too. The merchant, being ever so responsible and seeing what was currently happening to his friends, made the only reasonable choice and pulled another book. A book about minor elemental incantation. This instantly downloaded itself into his mind the moment he flipped it open, which knocked him out cold. This left the druid as the only sober party member to take care that everyone came back from their individual trips safely, in the middle of a scorching hot desert. Just as he was starting to manage the mage, whose already fragile psyche didn't respond well to the hallucinogens, "Moonworms! They're so furry, and they want to steal my nose hairs!" The barbarian dropped his book, let out a yelp, and made off into the desert at top speed. The druid gave chase to bring him back. Meanwhile, the dwarf picked up the book that had just spooked the barbarian. After quite a bit of running and several gained exhaustion points, the druid brought the barbarian back to the camp, only to be greeted by a mage that was manically shooting off one spell after another at what seemed to be the worst trip in the history of bad trips. Because unbeknownst to the druid, the dwarf had shown the mage the scary magical book while the druid had been out of camp. At this point, I have to give props to all my players for really playing this situation well. None of them had told the other players anything about the effects of the books they had drawn, but instead just RP'd the effects. As a result, the druid was still unaware just how fucked he was. Druid, elf, come help me calm down the mage. Elf, nah, I'm busy reading this book. Druid, merchant, some help? Merchant. Dwarf, hey elf, wanna see the book I have? Elf, nah, I'm good. Go bother someone who cares. In that moment, the mage just barely missed the camels with his fire beam, so the druid decided he'd had enough, and out came the anesthesist, Dr. Right Hook. With the druid being proficient in unarmed combat and the mage being a mage, this resulted in an instant knockout followed by the druid tying and gagging him. Cue the dwarf. Hey barbarian, you want to see my book? Barbarian. Whoa! And with that, the barbarian took off into the desert again, with the druid in tow. Luckily, the barbarian failed his constitution test and collapsed rather quickly, allowing the druid to drag him back to camp again, where he found the dwarf futzing with the restraints of the camels. At this point, the druid, a most peaceful character, was close to a heat stroke and very much at the end of his line, so he made the wise decision to hogtie everyone until they calmed down. Druid, hey dwarf, what are you doing with our camels? Dwarf, hey druid, want to see my right hook? And the dwarf went down. When he came to, the elf exchange went as followed. Druid, elf, give me that book. Elf, nah, I don't want right hook. And that's the story of how the druid's illiteracy and proficiency with unarmed fighting prevented the group from dying in the desert. In the aftermath, they had to get the mage a therapist to put him back together, as the drugs and the fear spell had played quite a number on his mental state. The elf had a few more run-ins with Dr. Right Hook before he was successfully weaned off his book. The dwarf got exorcised, just to be sure, and the merchant was, from this point onward, the land's foremost expert in incantations involving minor elemental beings. And the druid did get hit by heat stroke a little later down the line and spent most of the way back on the stretcher being dragged behind the camels. Too long, didn't read? You don't give your players something dangerous and expect them to use said thing responsibly. And I think anyone who's played D&D probably knows that's the truth. And it's a good thing that their druid studied at the Mike Tyson School for Problem Resolution, because otherwise they might all just be bleached skeletons laying in the middle of a desert somewhere. If you like these Reddit stories like this, make sure you drop a like, it helps out the channel. Subscribe if you want more, because I think I'll do more of these. And make sure you check out r/D&D stories, because it's a great subreddit. There's a lot of great stories in there. And I'll see you in the next one. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end. We appreciate you watching every one of our videos, and if you want to get a hold of us outside of YouTube, all of our social media links are in the description below. If you want to become a knight, why don't you go ahead and click on that subscribe button. And as always, keep those shields up.